Welcome. May the grace and the peace of the Lord be with you. Today I will be reading from Kalimatullah, the common word between us and you, reforming Islam to honor Prophet Muhammad by following the Sunnah of the Messiah, by Archie Waring. Chapter 5, Using Equal Weights, Balancing the Scales. Part 2, The Origins of the Mus'haf Qur'an. The earliest codices of the Qur'an were written in an Arabic script style called Hijazi script. This term was not given because the style was first used in the Hijaz region of Arabia, but only because it was used in the earliest manuscripts of the Qur'an, and Muhammad came from the Hijaz region. In fact, this style of Arabic has its origins in the far north desert regions between modern-day Jordan and Iraq. If the scribes who wrote the original Qur'an had been from Mecca, or Yathrib, they would have more likely used the Sabaic script that had been used in South and Central Arabia for centuries. The Sabaic script originated in the 8th century BC in the Semitic branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family. Like Aramaic, it is an abjad script, a writing system where only the consonants are represented and the reader has to infer the vowels. However, like Hebrew, the Sabaic script had developed the use of matras lectiones, the use of some consonant symbols to indicate the vowels, so that all but the long vowel A could be represented in the script by the 2nd century, long before Muhammad. Hence, the Sabaic alphabet, common to scribes in the Hijaz, could effectively represent all the sounds in the Arabic language. The classic Arabic script referred to as Hijazi, also an abjad script, was only in its infancy at the time of Muhammad. In fact, the Qur'an was the first literary work written in this script. Scholars of paleography and orthography describe the Arabic script in the 7th century as a scriptio defectiva, a formal term that means the script was not developed to the point that it could preserve the language in written form. The script was limited to just 17 consonantal characters, the razm, representing 28 consonants. Without dots, for example, the 5 Arabic consonants B, T, Th, Ni, E share the very same shape in the middle of a word. How then could the reader know for certain which consonants are indicated in a manuscript with no dots? Furthermore, the script has no vowels or system of matras lectiones. It would take a further 250 years during the Islamic era to develop the script sufficiently to represent the Arabic language. Professor François Desroches wrote, "The various deficiencies noted in the Hijazi-style manuscripts mean that it was not, in fact, possible to adequately preserve the integrity of the Quran through writing, as the Caliph Uthman intended when, according to the tradition, he decided to document the revelation. Not only did the Arabic script lack the diacritic dots to distinguish consonants of the same shape, it also lacked the hamza, a denoting a glottal stop, the sukun, above a consonant, a necessary symbol for writing consonant-vowel-consonant syllables, and the shadda, W, placed above a letter to indicate the sound is pronounced double length. Hence, the Quran interpretation is completely dependent on the tradition of the chain of memorization. The Quran could not be read correctly by someone who had not already memorized it. If the Hijazi script was scriptio defectiva and foreign to the Hijazi region, and Sabaic script was superior and the common script of Mecca and Yathrib scribes, commonly used for drawing up treaties and legal agreements, why did the first Quran get written in the least precise script borrowed from the far north of the peninsula? Were Muhammad's scribes from Yathrib, or were they from the region of modern-day Jordan? According to the standard narrative, during the Ridda Wars, many of the Muslims who had memorized the Quran were dying on the battlefield. Concern was raised that some of the Quran may get lost, so Abu Bakr agreed to having had a Mus'haf, codex, created. Initially, there was reluctance to create a codex as the Hijazi Arab culture respected oral means of transmitting sacred narrative. This is clear as they retorted they feared going against the wishes of the Prophet to do what the Prophet himself did not do. Sahih al-Bukhari 7191. Narrated Zayd bin Thabit. Abu Bakr sent for me owing to the large number of casualties in the Battle of Al-Yamama, while Umar was sitting with him. Abu Bakr said to me, Umar has come to my and said, a great number of Qaris of the Holy Quran were killed on the day of the Battle of Al-Yamama, and I am afraid that the casualties among the Qaris of the Quran may increase on other battlefields, whereby a large part of the Quran may be lost. Therefore, I consider it advisable that you, Abu Bakr, should have the Quran collected." I said, "How dare I do something which Allah's Messenger did not do?" Umar said, "By Allah, it is something beneficial." Umar kept on pressing me for that, till Allah opened my chest for that for which he had opened the chest of Umar, and I had in that matter the same opinion as Umar had. Abu Bakr then said to me, "Zaid, you are a wise young man, and we do not have any suspicion about you, and you used to write the divine inspiration for Allah's Messenger. So you should search for the fragmentary scripts of the Quran and collect it in one book." Zaid further said, "By Allah, if Abu Bakr had ordered me to shift a mountain among the mountains from one place to another, it would not have been heavier for me than this ordering me to collect the Quran." Then I said to Umar and Abu Bakr, "How can you do something which Allah's Messenger did not do?" Abu Bakr said, "By Allah, it is something beneficial." Zaid added, "So he, Abu Bakr, kept on pressing me for that, until Allah opened my chest for that for which he had opened the chests of Abu Bakr and Umar, and I had in that matter the same opinion as theirs. So I started compiling the Quran by collecting it from the leafless stalks of the date palm tree, and from the pieces of leather and hides, and from the stones, and from the chests of men who had memorized the Quran. I found the last verses of Sirat at-Tawbah. "Verily there has come unto you an apostle, Muhammad, from amongst yourselves." Surah 9, 128-129. From Khuzaimah or Abi Khuzaimah, and I added to it the rest of the surah. The manuscripts of the Quran remained with Abu Bakr till Allah took him unto him. Then it remained with Umar till Allah took him unto him, and then with Hafsa bint Umar. From the Hadith, it is obvious that neither Zaid, Umar, or Abu Bakr had memorized the Quran, or they would not think it an overwhelming task to collect it, as they could recite it and confirm it between themselves if the close companions were all reciters. We also learn from other Hadith that other Quran codices were in circulation at the time of Uthman's caliphate that were attributed to the companions Muhammad said were among the best reciters: Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ubay ibn Ka'b, and Mu'adh ibn Jabal. But none were distributed as an official version, as the original companions held the true Quran in their hearts. Narrated Masriq. Abdullah bin Amr mentioned Abdullah bin Mas'ud and said, "I shall ever love that man, for I heard the Prophet saying, 'Take, learn the Quran from four: Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Salim, Mu'adh, and Ubay bin Ka'b.'" Sahih al-Bukhari 49999. Modern scholarship is of the opinion that the narratives about Abu Bakr and Uthman authorizing Quran codices are most likely political fabrications of the 8th century. I think the evidence supports that the Hijazi Arabs were an illiterate people with a strong oral culture, experts in memorization, and capable of preserving their cultural traditions orally, and they applied these skills, as did Muhammad, to memorize the Quran. The authentic close companions of Muhammad would have certainly memorized it. It was only after the Muslims controlled the Middle East that they needed the codex format for the northern converts, who were not of the oral cultural tribes of the Hijaz region of Arabia. I think this supports the claim that the so-called four rightly guided caliphs were a revisionist fiction. They were not companions of the Prophet, but warlords who did not have the Quran in their hearts at all. How many companions of Muhammad had memorized the Quran by the time of his death? The Hadith have a broad range from as few as only 4. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Salim the freed slave of Abu Hudayfa, Ubay ibn Ka'b, and Mu'adh ibn Jabal, according to al-Bukhari, Sahih al-Bukhari 49999, to as many as 100 or more, in some accounts as many as 1,000. One must deduce that as few as only 4 had memorized all of the Quran, probably a second-tier group who were learning from the 4 who Muhammad had approved as teachers, in addition to himself, could bring the number up to 100 or 200 by 632, who were on the path to memorization, able to recite a surah or more, and then a third group, 1,000, who could recite the prayers and possibly a few other verses. The rest on the Ummah participated in the community prayers and understood that there is only one God and Muhammad was the prophet of God. But then the prophet dies and civil war breaks out. So how many of them died during the Ridda Wars? And if the real Abu Bakr was the warlord who did not know the Quran, but only that it was the means to legitimizing central power, would his trusted generals be chosen from the companions of Muhammad, or his relatives and tribal allies who understood the sword? The Abu Bakr Mus'haf is the one used later by Uthman to prepare the standardized Quran. So the narrative of Abu Bakr as the close companion of Muhammad was vital, as was the backstories of the next two caliphs. We understand from the study of world history a common theme. The victors write the history, but the truth may be unveiled by the records of the enemies of the state, and the redacted versions of history released by the next faction to gain power. Historians can wade between the bias of the reports to piece together a reasonable understanding of what really happened in most well-documented histories. But for the origin of Islam, the victors for the next 1400 years all held the sacred origin of Islam in common, and no challenge to the narrative was tolerated. To question was blasphemous and punishable by death. What we can call the standard narrative, that the companions of the Prophet were holy warlords who continued the campaign started by Muhammad, and the armies of thousands were all reciters of Quran is Sahih of the highest standard, but written more than 200 years after Muhammad. The political value of the narrative is that it lends legitimacy to the origin of the Uthman Mus'haf, the state-issued Quran, and reason to dismiss any claims from other, possibly the real companions of Muhammad, who may have published a Mus'haf of their own. History could not hide that there were many differences in the recitations of Quran in the time of Uthman's caliphate. The narrative explains this as mere differences in regional dialects. Hence, according to the standard narrative, what Uthman did was heroic, securing the closed canon of the Quran within 19 years of Muhammad by choosing the dialect of the Qurashi from the Abu Bakr Codex, to preserve the perfect Quran in codex format for all time. But the narrative undermines the credibility of the oral recitation tradition, and, in light of what we know about the Scriptio Defectiva Hijazi script, 15-consonant rasm, we can deduce that the original Quran could not possibly preserve a specific Arabic dialect as suggested by the narrative. It could not even preserve the actual words. However, the author, or redactor, of this Hadith tradition, living in the 9th century, was apparently unaware of the historical development of the Arabic script, fabricating a narrative to explain the different Arabic Qur'ans that was an impossibility. If much of the Quran Zayd put together was based on written copies, those verses have the correct rasm, but no one alive to remember how to use it to recite, the actual words are lost. If the verse was based on someone's memory, they recited it for Zayd, but he wrote it down only as the rasm. Then the chain was broken, as now it would be read by others who had not memorized it from the reciter who gave it to Zayd. If the Quran was first written into a codex in Yathrib, soon after the Prophet's death, why didn't Zayd, supposedly a professional scribe of the Hejaz region, use the Sabiac Southern Arabic script? If he had, the Quran would have been preserved unambiguously, as all the sounds in the Arabic language could be represented. There is no explanation as to why a scribe would choose a northern shorthand script that had never been used to create any document ever before. It seems more likely that the first official codex was in the second half of the 7th century and completed in the north, probably in Syria, Iraq, or possibly in the region of modern-day Jordan, where the Nabatean script was originally adapted into Arabic only a century before. The dotting and diacritic marks were not in development until the time of Abd al-Malik, the early 8th century, becoming more standardized by mid-century, over 90 years after Muhammad, at the earliest. Only at this point could the full consonantal rasm be preserved by the pen. Long and short vowel sounds came a further century later. So, it would not be until late in the 9th century at the earliest that dialects could possibly be distinguished in the script. And yet, the Hadith anachronistically narrate Uthman canonizing a state-authorized version of the Quran in 651 to address the issue of many different Arabic dialects being written into the codex. Narrated Anas bin Malik, Hudayfa bin al-Yaman came to Uthman at the time when the people of Sham and the people of Iraq were waging war to conquer Armenia and Azerbaijan. Hudayfa was afraid of the people of Sham and Iraq, differences in the recitation of the Qur'an. So he said to Uthman, "O chief of the believers, save this nation before they differ about the book, Qur'an, as Jews and the Christians did before." So Uthman sent a message to Hafsa saying, "Send us the manuscripts of the Qur'an so that we may compile the Qur'anic materials in perfect copies and return the manuscripts to you." Hafsa sent it to Uthman. Uthman then ordered Zayd bin Thabit, Abdullah bin Az-Zubair, Sa'id bin al-As, and Abdurrahman bin Harith bin Hisham to rewrite the manuscripts in perfect copies. Uthman said to the three Qurayshi men, "In case you disagree with Zayd bin Thabit on any point in the Qur'an, then write it in the dialect of Quraysh." The Qur'an was revealed in their tongue. They did so, and when they had written many copies, Uthman returned the original manuscripts to Hafsa. Uthman sent to every Muslim province one copy of what they had copied, and ordered that all the other Quranic materials, whether written in fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, be burnt. Sahih al-Bukhari, 4987. If the narrative is true, that Uthman destroys all versions of the Qur'an except one standardizing the Qur'an in 651, then it could not be to resolve dialect variances as it was only a Razm text. Hence we must conclude there were many variances in the Razm, possibly including different Razms as recited by Abdullah ibn Masud, Ubay ibn Ka'b, and Mu'adh ibn Jabal. However, in his haste to ensure a single Arabic version, Uthman destroyed these written witnesses of the Qur'an, the equivalent to destroying 3 of the 4 witnesses of the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So today, we only have the standardized Uthmanic Razm, the one Zayd constructed haphazardly for Abu Bakr during the Battle of Yamama. The people supposedly closest to the Prophet, Umar, Abu Bakr, Zayd, and the others who did not die in the first few months of the Ridda War, apparently did not memorize much of the Qur'an during Muhammad's lifetime. Maybe they were not the real companions of the Prophet after all. So, Uthman had allegedly ensured a single standardized Razm in 651, or within a few years of this date, or maybe it was a century later. But this single Razm would have the diacritic markings added independently in each major province over the next 2 centuries. The differences in the Qira'at, different readings, do include minor variations in prolongation, intonation, and pronunciation of words, variances in dialect perhaps, but more significantly, they include countless differences in consonants and vowels, and hence words and phrases. 7 Qira'at came to be referred to as canonical. They all use the same Uthmanic Razm, as all other Quranic Razm witnesses had been destroyed in the fire by decree of the Caliph. It was wise to construct a tradition that Muhammad received the Qur'an 7 times with the canonized differences as any suggestion from, say, Iraq or Saudi Arabia or Egypt, that their Qira'at is the authentic one and the other 6 are inauthentic, would only be another reason for war. The number 7 was chosen for this tradition as it connects to a Quranic reference, but it soon became apparent that there were more Qira'at than 7. It was updated to 10 canonical Qira'at, and today 33 are recognized. The standard narrative confirms that there were faithful followers who were transmitting the ayah, such that the differences in their recitations could be noticed. But this must have been a minority. The rapid speed of the conquest, where every defending army and conquered settlement were given the option to join or be put to the sword, the Ummah rapidly grew to hundreds of thousands to millions in less than 3 decades. The total population controlled by the Caliphate by 1660 is estimated to have been 20 million. 3 decades of warfare, not 3 decades of intensive madrasa education, would not have created even a ruling class of well-educated reciters of Qur'an. Most were clearly believers in that they said the Shahada and were convinced by the success of the conquest that Allah, the God of Muhammad, was with them. But the majority would have at best had time to learn only the prayers. When the Mus'haf Razm was copied and made available late in the 8th century, probably mostly to the teachers of the 3rd generation, not the warriors of the conquest, The Razam Scriptio Defectiva was recited differently in each province and community. Hence, we would expect regional divergence as the diacritical markings were gradually added in the 2nd and 3rd centuries of Islam, which is exactly what we do find. Certainly, it is reasonable to accept there would have been small madrasa established during these early decades, by the 4 reciters Muhammad had given credit to as teachers, and then by their students. But with the rapid expanse of the Ummah populace and the inheritance of the great cities of influence in former Eastern Christendom, their influence would have been hampered if not competed out by those given authority to teach by the Abbasids. Politically, those who serve the narrative are promoted. Nevertheless, the charitable conclusion is that the Uthman Rasam does preserve the Quran, and true meaning can be found in the Qira'at, regional readings. But perfect preservation is a misnomer, and the scales are set to balance with the Torah and Gospel. Those who live in glass houses should not throw stones. As believers, we are justified by faith that God is faithful to preserve His scriptures as He promised. But such promises were given to all the scriptures previously revealed. God does not change. What He has revealed for all of mankind. In all cases, the books of God that came before were recognized and confirmed by further prophets, including Muhammad. God's promise revealed to Moses, "The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." Deuteronomy 29:29. God's promise confirmed by a major prophet, "The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever." Isaiah 48. Jesus promises that His words will remain with us. "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." Matthew 24:35. Do not argue with the people of the book unless gracefully, except with those of them who act wrongfully, and say, "We believe in what has been revealed to us and what was revealed to you. Our God and your God is one, and to Him we submit." Surah Al-Ankabut 29:46. The Quran most Muslims today regard as standard is the Hafs version that was made popular under the Ottoman Empire. The Hafs Qur'an was finally selected for universal use by Cairo University, published July 10, 1924. This was done because international students were quoting Qur'an differently in their exams, and it was too hard for the professors to mark the papers. This was the 5th time the Arabic Qur'an had been canonized, published as the official version. Uthman's edition was the first in 651. The second canonization was in AD 936, when the 7 Qira'at were recognized. Then in 1194, after Al-Dani and Al-Shatibi had settled a system of having 2 transmitters per reading, so the 7 readings each had 2 transmitters, making 14 Qira'at Qur'ans. Then in 1429, the 7 readings were expanded to 10 at the 4th canonization of the Qur'an, although even today Islamic scholars are divided. For one example of a discrepancy in the Hafs Qur'an used today, consider Surah Az-Zukhruf, verse 45. This verse has been a challenge for modern Islamic commentators, as it reads that Allah advised Muhammad to ask the prophets before him to confirm that no other gods should be worshipped. But of course, how could Muhammad ask the prophets before him, there were none still living, and ask those we sent before you of our messengers, did we make besides the most gracious, other gods to be worshipped? Surah Az-Zukhruf 43-45. Some commentators have suggested that Muhammad could have asked the previous prophets during his night journey to the heavens. However, chronologically, the night journey had already happened before Surah Al-Isra was revealed, and the night journey is a legendary tale found only in the Hadith. The surah associated with this tradition is misused without context. We will review this in a later chapter. But there is an easy explanation. If one accepts that scribal errors have occurred in the Quran, just as in all other hand-copied books, and furthermore, the Razm could have been interpreted in many ways during the development of the script. The Tafsir Ibn Kathir indicates that the Mus'haf of Ibn Mas'ud, a Mus'haf he must have had access to, but has since been destroyed as an intolerable variance to Uthman's, reads, "And ask those who were sent other messengers before you." This makes clear sense. Allah is asking Muhammad to confirm the correct teaching with the Christians, who have the books of the previous messengers with them. This is also confirmed elsewhere in the Quran, Surah Yunus 10:94. Ibn Kathir, recognizing the discrepancy between the Qur'ans of Ibn Mas'ud and Hafs, concludes, "Yet this appears to be an explanation rather than an alternate version of recitation, and Allah knows best." What else could he conclude, if he valued his own life? The Encyclopedia of the Quranic Readings, entitled Mujam al-Qira'at al-Qur'aniyya, Ma'a Maqaddima fi Qira'at wa Ashhar al-Qurra, compared the 10 different Arabic Quran Qira'at and lists 10,243 variants in the Arabic Quran, excluding spelling errors. Variants include the difference in nouns, singular, dual, plural, as well as masculine and feminine, verbs, past, present, or imperative, addition and deletion of words, word order, transposition, word substitutions. These variant Arabic Qur'ans are not differences in dialects, they are differences in words and verses that affect the meaning of the passage. Keeping in mind that all the many Qira'at are based on the same Uthmanic Razm, which was only one of many Razm variances made by the companions of Muhammad, before they were destroyed to stabilize the Quran as a single Razm for all regions of the empire. It is only by faith we can assume the Quran of today, within the range of meanings expressed in the many Qira'at, retains what Allah had intended. We believe by faith that none can change His words in any of His books, including but by no means limited to the Quran. To the modern Muslim, this may all come as a shock, as the internet has proliferated the false narrative of perfect preservation of the Quran with even more fervor than it has proliferated the false accusations of Bible corruption. However, it was not always the way. Islamic scholars of past generations were comfortable with the ambiguity of the Razm and multiple ways to read it in Arabic, and at least for the first 3 centuries, they were comfortable to accept that all the books of God revealed to the previous prophets were included in the words of Allah that none could change. This is one reason the scholars felt it was not possible to translate the Quran. There is far too much ambiguity for any direct translation of the original. But the Hafs Quran, with all the diacritical markings, can be translated accurately as a single variant. In the next reading, we will balance the scales. First, we will consider the standard narrative of how the apologists tried to resolve the conflict in the evidence to preserve the narrative. Then we will settle any unrest by faith and reason working together and defend the Quran. Christians have a complete set of scriptures that start with God creating the universe, Genesis, then the history of the world, the forming of the nations, the giving of the first Al-Kitab to Moses, the promises of God to send the Messiah, the one who is the way, the living Kalimatullah who reveals the Sunnah of Allah that offers salvation, ending with the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation that foretells the end days, the great day of resurrection to judgment, before the throne of God, and the eternal paradise of the new heavens and new earth, where God will rule over His people as the eternal King of righteousness. Hence, most Christians will stop there and conclude there is nothing in the Quran. But I beg to differ, so stay with me. Muhammad has a place as the last messenger. The Quran has relevance, as a warning not to commit shirk, not to make any man, messenger or scholar a partner with Allah, not to take the books of men and set them over the Al-Kitab, the Word of God. Jews, Christians, and Muslims have something to gain from heeding the warnings in the Quran. I believe it contains a message that, rightly understood and received with the humility seen in the Sunnah of Messiah, can unite all the Abrahamic faiths into the Tawheed of Allah, starting with Christianity and Islam. Then, as we fellowship with the God of Israel in His grace and peace, His first love, Israel will be made jealous for her husband and call on Him, their Messiah. As Jesus lamented over His beloved Israel, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again, until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Matthew 23:37-39, Luke 19:41-44. That is, When Israel recognizes that Jesus is their Messiah, their King, the Lord of all the nations, then he will return in his second coming as the Messiah ben David, the one they had rejected, the one who loves them and calls to them even today. So I ask, did they stumble in order that they might fall? By no means. Rather, through their trespass, salvation has come to the Gentiles, so as to make Israel jealous. Now if their trespass means riches for the world, and if their failure means riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their full inclusion mean? Romans 11:11-12. Until next time, may the grace and the peace of the Lord be with you.